Let me first thank Robert Lowell for answering an emergency call the way he did when Alan Tate could not make it, and I personally thank him on your behalf and for me for pulling us into this delightful hole. Robert Lowell, as a poet, is not somebody who grew. He is somebody who was passed from the very first poem of his to the poems that he has been writing in the last few years. It has been perfectly evident that this is a major poet with major concerns in the mainstream and great tradition of poetry, English and American and French and German, and someone who truly operates in a universe Eliot foresaw, where the poet existed as someone continuous with all other poets and all other poetry. And he writes now to us and with us as our major poetic voice, Robert Lowell.
I'm not going to read interminably, but everything comes from a different book, and but very little comes from each book. And I'm sorry people had to be horsed out of here. That I sort of feel like people being killed at a peace parade. What I want to do tonight is sort of memorial reading for several friends of mine, poets of my generation who've died. I'm thinking particularly, I'm going to start with Delmore Schwartz, who died so recently, and then I want to read from Randall Jarrell and from Theodore Roethke, and then end with Alan Tate, who would have given this reading, who's very much alive. And now, I've thought about this occasion more, the poets and their poems. I've thought about it a good deal more than I've thought about what I'm going to say, which is bad technique. So this may be rather messy and dull. I think there's something peculiar about the generation I belong to, that they've had strange, rather difficult lives on the whole, and more than poets usually do. And I don't want to I have no profound generalization on that, I think it's so, though. And three of the best have died, Schwartz, Jarrell, and Roethke, and all died in their 50s, which in the old days wouldn't be young at all. That you go through any standard British anthology and you'd find, I imagine most of the poets died before they were 50, and nobody thinks of them dying young, but we do today, and these seem like lives that were terminated before they should have been. Those three were three of the best. To complete the list, I'd add of the living, Elizabeth Bishop and Carl Shapiro and John Berryman. That would be the tops we have, I think. And now it's interesting to think back that when I met Alan Tate in 1937, none of these people were known at all. And I think Randall Jarrell had won a Southern Review poetry contest, which Tate was one of the judges, but didn't make him first, but he came out first. And Schwartz, I don't think, was known at all, but 2 years later, he was the most famous young poet. And Roethke, who was older than any of us, really became known much later. I think he published earlier probably, but he was not until the end of the 40s did he become famous, and now he's the most famous of all, I think. And so in a way, he's an older poet, he has different influences, but he arrived later. And you couldn't exactly describe him as someone whose crucial period was the 30s, the way it was for us, that terrible decade of approaching war. Now, I want to read from Delmore Schwartz, and probably most of you know his poetry and something about his life, and I'm not, I think there's no point in disguising it was a tragic life, and I don't want to enlarge on that, but that when he began, he was also a sort of almost sensationally reasonable and gifted poet, and people who met him personally would come back. And when I was 20, a friend of mine, a novelist, said, "This is the one mature young man I've ever met." Not me, but Schwartz. And I felt abashed and felt the justice of it. And I knew him very well in the 40s, and he was one of my dearest friends, and then we were less close. But I think of that period, that's what's permanent for me. And he's hard to describe. I picture him as perpetually in a sort of mustard-colored gabardine suit, somehow unpressed but very carefully taken care of. And he'd read everything, I mean, and everything that was important to read. I mean, he knew his Freud backwards, and he knew his English poetry backwards, and any number of people like Werner Jaeger he introduced me to. And on every subject he was informative, and he had little intuitive remarks. Slightly suspicious, the slight paranoia that made these things all the more penetrating. I wish I had some sort of total recall for his conversations, which were absolutely dazzling and an education to me. And I remember I was a Roman Catholic, then I was going to go on a retreat. You go and you meditate, and I was talking to Delmore about it, and I said, "I'm going somewhere, it's outside Providence." And he said, "Aren't we all?" There was a marvelous thing that appeared in the Village Voice, that he was going on and on about his enemies, and the girl with him said, "You've got to stop, this is nonsense, and you're being paranoid." And he suddenly said, "But even a paranoid has enemies." His poetry, the book that, I think he remained a good poet till the end, and but the book that made the greatest sensation was his first, called "In Dreams Begin Responsibilities." And the poem, it was made up of poems, a short story about seeing a movie of Delmore being born, or his parents before he was born, very fancy, brilliant story, and a play with Marx and Freud and other people going to Coriolanus, Shakespeare's Coriolanus, and this week no young man had come out with such a book. And Now, when you go back to the poems, they're very moving. He's a peculiar poet. He's full of information, and he's not a resonant lyrical poet. That he didn't go in for that. And I remember him saying to me that he felt Wordsworth was an infinitely greater poet than Keats, and some poet with a plain style was much better than Dylan Thomas. That he didn't believe in loading your line and being lyrical. That he wanted plain statement and room to think in a poem, room to get the voice to come through. This is one of his famous poems that I think it was once almost his most famous. Many of you know it probably, the heavy bear who goes with me. Now this is a version, these poems are influenced by Yeats and Auden, but they're given a peculiarly different twist in Delmore, and the tone is different. And the heavy bear, it's a sort of body and soul poem, the bear being the body and I being the soul, and only it's lust and heaviness, something that dogs you and clogs you down. And it's a poem of anguish and a poem of humor. The heavy bear who goes with me. And there's a quote, I don't know where it's from, the withness of the body. The heavy bear who goes with me, a manifold honey to smear his face, clumsy and lumbering here and there, the central ton of every place. The hungry, beating, brutish one, in love with candy, anger, and sleep, crazy factotum, disheveling all, climbs the building, kicks the football, boxes his brother in the hate-ridden city. Breathing at my side, that heavy animal, that heavy bear who sleeps with me, howls in his sleep for a world of sugar. A sweetness intimate as the water's clasp, howls in his sleep because the tightrope trembles and shows the darkness beneath. The strutting show-off is terrified, dressed in his dress suit, bulging his pants, trembles to think that his quivering meat must finally wince to nothing at all. That inescapable animal walks with me, has followed me since the black womb held, moves where I move, distorting my gesture, a caricature, a swollen shadow, a stupid clown of the spirit's motive, perplexes and affronts with his own darkness the secret life of belly and bone. Opaque, too near my private, yet unknown, stretches to embrace the very dear with whom I would walk without him near. Touches her grossly, although a word would bear my heart and make me clear, stumbles, flounders, and strives to be fed, dragging me with him in his mouthing care amid the 100 million of his kind. Nice last line, the scrimmage of appetite everywhere. There's a line in here that seems very typical of Delmore to me, that the very dear with whom I would walk without him near. That clumsy, deliberately clumsy inverted word order, you somehow get the sort of mumbling humor of his own conversation there. This is a poem I think is not famous, and it's almost light verse. I want to read 3 of each of these people. This is called The True Blue American, and he comes from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And his name is Jeremiah Dixon. Well, this doesn't need to be explained, I think. Delmore had a wonderful gift, more than any of us, I think, for sort of popular culture of movies that one would go to in the drugstore and the baseball games and that sort of thing. And even his intellectual equipment was uneccentric. It was, he was, in a way, the most centrally placed poet. The True Blue American. Jeremiah Dixon was a true blue American, for he was a little boy who understood America, for he felt that he must think about everything, because that's all there is to think about. Knowing immediately the intimacy of truth and comedy, knowing intuitively how a sense of humor was a necessity for one and for all who live in America. Thus, natively and naturally, when on an April Sunday in an ice cream parlor, Jeremiah was requested to choose between a chocolate sundae and a banana split, he answered unhesitatingly, having no need to think of it, being a true blue American, determined to continue as he began, rejecting the either-or of Kierkegaard and many another European, refusing to accept alternatives, refusing to believe the choice of between, rejecting selection, denying dilemma, electing absolute affirmation, knowing in his breast the infinite and the gold of the endless frontier, the deathless West. Both, I will have them both declare the I'll have them both declare this true blue American in Cambridge, Massachusetts on an April Sunday, instructed by the great department stores, by the 5 and 10, taught by Christmas, by the circus, by the vulgarity and grandeur of Niagara Falls and the Grand Canyon, tutored by the grandeur, vulgarity, and infinite appetite, gratified and shining in the darkness of the light on Saturdays at the double bills of the moon pictures. The consummation of the advertisements of the imagination of the light, which is, as it was, the infinite belief and infinite hope of Columbus, Barnum, Edison, and Jeremiah Dixon. There's a wonderful, strange one I'm not going to read, but it's about Lincoln as a manic depressive. And a lot more about him. It's a brilliant, sympathetic poem. I want to just read one more of Delmore's, which I think he thought was his best poem. I know he used to. And it's called Starlight, Like Intuition Pierced the 12. It's later than the first poem I read and earlier than the second. And the 12 are the 12 disciples of Christ. And quite properly, they're quite Jewish somehow in this poem. And they've got Jewish humor, which they don't have in the gospel. But it's not a humorous poem like the one I just read. The theme, I'm going to read a poem later of Tate's, more or less the same subject, and they're not at all alike. Once you've seen the absolute person, life's impossible. That's the Tate theme, and that's part of Delmore's. And another is that you don't know whether this has made everything better or everything worse. But life can never be the same. I don't suppose this poem you'd put in devotional anthologies. It's not a poem of faith, but it's about Christ. Starlight like intuition pierced the 12. Interesting line. The starlight's intuitions pierced the 12. The brittle night sky sparkled like a tune, tinkled and tapped out on a xylophone. Empty and vain, a glittering dune, the moon arose too big, and in the mood which ruled seemed like a useless beauty in a pit. And then one said, after he carefully spat, no matter what we do, he looks at it. I cannot see a child or find a girl beyond his smile which glows like that spring moon. Nothing no more the same, the second said. Though all may be forgiven, never quite healed, the wound I bear as witness standing by. no ceremony surely appropriate, no secret love, escape, or sleep, because no matter what I do, he looks at it. Now, said the third, no thing will be the same. I am as one who never shuts his eyes. The sea and sky no more are marvelous, and I no longer understand surprise. Now, said the fourth, nothing will be enough. I heard his voice accomplishing all wit. No word can be unsaid, no deed withdrawn. No matter what is said, he measures it. Vision, imagination, hope, or dream, believed, denied, the scene we wish to see. It does not matter in the least, for what is altered if it is not true. That we saw goodness as it is, this is the awe and the abyss which we will not forget. His story now the sky which holds all thought, no matter what I think of it. And I will never be what once I was, said one for long as narrow as a knife. And we will never be what once we were. We have died once, this is a second life. My mind is spilled in moral chaos, one righteous as Job exclaimed. Now infinite suspicion of my heart stems what I will. No matter what I choose, he stares at it. I am as one native in summer places, 10 weeks' excitement paid for by the rich, debauched by that and then all winter bored. Those are fine lines. The sixth declared, his peak has left us a ditch. He came to make this life more difficult. The seventh said, no one will ever fit his measures, heights, all is inadequate. No matter what I do, what good is it? He gave forgiveness to us. What a gift. The eighth chimed in. But now we know how much must be forgiven. But if forgiven, what? The crime which was will be, and the least touched revives the memory. What is forgiveness worth? The ninth spoke thus. Who will ever sit at ease in Zion at the Easter feast? No matter what the place, he touches it. And I will always stammer since he spoke. One who had been most eloquent said stammering, I looked too long at the sun, like too much light, so too much goodness is a boomerang. Laughed the 11th of the troop, I must try what he tried. I saw the infinite who walked the lake and raised the hopeless dead. No matter what the feat, he first accomplished it. And grand conclusion. So spoke the 12th, and then the 12 in chorus. Unspeakable, unnatural goodness is risen and shines and never will ignore us. He glows forever in all consciousness. Forgiveness, love, and hope possess the pit and bring our endless guilt like shadows bars. No matter what we do, he stares at it. What pity then deny? What debt defer? We know he looks at us like all the stars, and we shall never be as once we were. This life will never be what once it was. I had an experience this weekend which brought me sort of closer to these people that are dead. The very boneheaded thing that I was driving a car on the Cape with heavy traffic and was thinking about how I'd get off that road onto another road, and was stopped in the traffic looking at a map, and suddenly I whammed into the car in front of me and looked up and saw the windshield shattered and some of my hair sticking in the sort of cobwebby-like splinters. And now Delmore saw a reason for everything. There were no accidents. Complete Freudian causation. And if you had a nickname, if your last name had 2 syllables, there's a reason for it. And he'd have seen a reason for this accident, a very deep one, and would probably scared me to death much more than the accident. But you think a little thing like that really had no reason. I didn't even know the car was moving, and that, I wasn't hurt at all. I'd have been dead without knowing it. And nothing could be worse than that, could it? If that's what to be dead is. Now, the second point was one who was closer to me, Randall Jarrell, and when I was a student at Kenyon, he was an instructor there, and like Tate, he was a Southerner. He studied at Vanderbilt. His orientation was very different. He was quite leftist in the 30s, and he wasn't an agrarian and any of that sort of thing at all, and was despised all that. But he had a Southern background, and in the war he was a pilot, and then he turned out to be too old and inept to be a pilot, and became a pilot's instructor. And he wrote, I think, the best poems I've read about the Second World War, and he had this enormous knowledge of the pilots, both personally. They were his students, and he knew everything about planes. I remember there weren't discussions, one only listened to Randall, but explaining how the few English planes were far superior to the German ones, and he could tell you why and so forth. And well, he knew the whole machinery, and they're rather heartbreaking poems of these people who are both killers and killed. There's something childish about the pilots bombing the cities they read about in school books and didn't know what they're doing really, and dying themselves. And that's a great moment in his poetry, and I'm not going to read those, but some of his late poems, which written 3 or 4 years, year even, before his death. And his style got simpler and simpler. He's quite a different poet from Delmore, though they're exactly the same age and felt the same influences and same intellectual influences and the same poetic ones. And both of them were very talented critics. They were the two best critics we had. And but Jarrell wanted every line charged and magical and glistening. And many of his best poems are about women and children, and the last book is mostly about women portraits, and some of them tender, some quite grim. Well, this is a quite nasty poem. I had this here. Yeah. I'm going to read 3 of these sketches, and they get decreasingly savage and satirical. This is the most extreme. It's called a very short poem at Montecito, some dreadful Santa Barbara suburb. In a fashionable suburb of Santa Barbara, Montecito, there visited me one night at midnight a scream with breasts. As it hung there in the sweet air that was always the right temperature, the contractors who had undertaken to dismantle it stripped off the lips, let the air out of the breasts. People disappear, even in Montecito. Greenie Taliaferro in her white Maya, how do you pronounce M-A-I-L-L-O-T? Mayo, yeah, good. Like the French sculptor. Greenie Taliaferro in her white maillot, her good figure almost firm, her old pepper and salt hair stripped by the hairdresser to nothing and dyed platinum. Greenie has left her Bentley. They have thrown away her electric toothbrush. Someone else slips the key into the lock of her safety deposit box at the Crocker Anglo Bank. Her seat at the cricket matches is warmed by buttocks less delectable than hers. Greenie's girdle is empty. A scream hangs there in the night. They strip off the lips, let the air out of the breasts, and Greenie has gone into the greater Montecito that surrounds Montecito like the echo of a scream. Now this is sort of the same and also a satire, and it's about a woman in her late 50s, I think, who's just been to the funeral of another woman in her late 50s. And next day, it's called, it's the day after the funeral, and it begins in a supermarket with marvelous things you can buy called cheer and joy and even all. And the heroine of this poem realizes that the boys who help with the groceries don't look at her with lust anymore, and that's only the dog is, the boy looks at the dog more than he looks at the woman. And then she's in a car and she looks at her face in the mirror, and then there's a flashback of the face of her friend in its coffin and embalmed, as people are embalmed now. And but at the end of the poem, you realize we're all like this. This isn't satire, that we all grow old and die this way. And this, I think, is a poem of great compassion as well as wit. Moving from cheer to joy, from joy to all, I take a box and add it to my wild rice, my Cornish game hens. The slacked or shorted, basketed, identical food-gathering flocks to ourselves I overlook. Wisdom, said William James, is learning what to overlook. And I am wise if that is wisdom. Yet somehow as I buy all from these shelves, and the boy takes it to my station wagon, what I've become troubles me even if I shut my eyes. When I was young and miserable and pretty and poor, I'd wish what all girls wish, to have a husband, a house and children. Now that I'm old, my wish is womanish, that the boy putting groceries in my car see me. It bewilders me he doesn't see me. For so many years, I was good enough to eat. The world looked at me and its mouth watered. How often they have undressed me, the eyes of strangers, and holding their flesh within my flesh, their vile imaginings within my imagining, I too have taken the chance of life. Now the boy pats my dog and we start home. Now I'm good. The last mistaken, ecstatic, accidental bliss, the blind happiness that bursting leaves upon the palm some soap and water. It was so long ago, back in some gay 20s, 90s, I don't know. Today I miss my lovely daughter away at school, my sons away at school, my husband away at work. I wish for them. The dog, the maid, and I go through the sure unvarying days at home in them. As I look at my life, I am afraid that it will change as I am changing. I am afraid this morning of my face. It looks at me from the rear view mirror with the eyes I hate, the smile I hate. Its plain lined look of gray discovery repeats to me, "You're old." That's all. I'm old. Operated on, dressed body were my face and body. As I think of her, I hear her telling me how young I seem. I am exceptional. I think of all I have, but really no one is exceptional. No one has anything. I'm anybody. I stand beside my grave, confused with my life that is commonplace and solitary. Wonderful, downbeat, quiet ending. This is a very sad one, called The Lost Children, and it's about two children, one dark-haired and one blonde, and one has died and the other's grown up, and they're, in a sense, both lost. And somewhere in Freud there's a statement that all these magical children, what becomes of them, that they become sort of wooden adults. And I once heard Angus Wilson, the novelist, talking about these gruesome deaths in Victorian novels of young children that the Victorians seemed to delight in. And he felt that this was a society where people weren't very much against their society consciously, but underneath they rather hated it, and they felt that a child was lost in any case, that when maturity came, that would perish. Well, this is just two children, the lost children. The mother's telling the story. Two little girls, one fair, one dark, one alive, one dead, are running hand in hand through a sunny house. The two are dressed in red and white gingham with puffed sleeves and sashes. They run away from me. But I am happy. When I wake, I feel no sadness, only delight. I've seen them again, and I'm comforted that somewhere they still are. It is strange to carry inside you someone else's body, to know it before it's born, to see at last that it's a boy or girl and perfect, to bathe it and dress it, to watch it, nurse it at your breast till you almost know it better than you know yourself, better than it knows itself. You own it as if you made it. You are the authority upon it. But as the child learns to take care of herself, you know her less. Her accidents, adventures are her own. You lose track of them. Still, you know more about her than anyone except her. Little by little, the child in her dies. You say, I've lost a child but gained a friend. You feel yourself gradually discarded. She argues with you or ignores you or is kind to you. She who begged to follow you anywhere just as long as it was you finds follow the leader no more fun. She makes few demands. You are grateful for the few. The young person who writes once a week is the authority upon herself. She sits in my living room and shows her husband my albums of her as a child. He enjoys them and makes fun of them. I look too, and I realize the girl in the matching blue mother and daughter dress, the fair one carrying the tin lunchbox with the half-pint thermos bottle, or training her pet duck to go down the slide, is lost just as the dark one who is dead is lost. But the world in which the two wear their flared coats and the hats that match exists so uncannily that after I've seen its pictures for an hour, I believe in it. The bandage coming loose one has in the picture of the other's birthday, the castles they are building at the beach for asthma. I look at them, and all the old sure knowledge floods over me when I put the album down. I keep saying inside, I did know those children. I braided those braids. I was driving the car the day that she stepped in the can of grease we were taking to the butcher for our ration points. You don't remember that kind of activity. I know those children. I know all about them. Where are they? I stare at her and try to see some sign of the child she was. I can't believe there isn't any. I tell her foolishly, pointing at the picture, that I keep wondering where she is. She tells me, here I am. Yes, and the other isn't dead, but has everlasting life. That's said witheringly. The girl from next door, the borrowed child, said to me the other day, you like children so much, don't you want to have some of your own? I couldn't believe that she could say it. I thought, surely you can look at me and see them. When I see them in my dreams, I feel such joy. If I could dream of them every night. When I think of my dream of the little girls, it's as if we were playing hide and seek. The dark one looks at me longingly and disappears. The fair one stays in sight, just out of reach, no matter where I reach. I'm tired as a mother who's played all day some rainy day. I don't want to play it anymore. I don't want to, but the child keeps on playing, so I play. If I could read these better and maybe explain them better, I think you'd get quite a picture of this whole age, and you must feel these entirely different characters I've just been reading. And Roethke is very different still, and you probably know him better, and he's certainly the poet with the most powerful lyrical gift. He doesn't tend to have portraits of people, and he doesn't have the kind of intellectual equipment that Schwartz had and the references to things he read. And he's a poet more of sheer power. Personally, he was a large man, and he had sort of Dylan Thomas qualities. Then you put him in a room, if he didn't say anything, your eyes would be on him, that he'd be the bulkiest person there. And when he started talking, everyone would listen, amused and awed. And he was a strange combination of a rather Rabelaisian person, rather bawdy, and then very delicate and very meticulous about metrics. And one of his great subjects is the greenhouse of his uncle that he grew up in, and he knew all about flowers. And he was a great poet for describing little things, little animals, minnows, and flowers. His first great poems, I think, were called cuttings, just descriptions of little things in the greenhouse. Then he wrote some wonderful love poems in a more grand style, and there's some Whitman-like poems. Perhaps his most remarkable poems, some very long ones, sort of surrealist poems. They're sort of nightmare searches, a great gift for nonsense verse that has probing personal meanings. I want to read three that are fairly late. I won't read any of the greenhouse ones, but they're very important. These sort of fit together. This is the first one, I think you know, it's his most famous love poem. His history as a poet, all these people started differently. Roethke wasn't influenced by Auden, which was sort of unique, except in a very peculiar way that he had a great feel for nonsense verse and light verse, and perhaps he got that from Auden, but he got it so late that he handled it completely his own way, and his general style shows no trace of Auden, but his early poems are very dry and strict and beautifully written, and they're probably influenced by the classicist Ivor Winters, and Roethke wasn't a critic like Schwartz and Jarrell, yet on occasion he wrote very good criticism, but he wasn't a sort of professional critic. And it's interesting that perhaps his most serious critical essay, the one at the end of his book, is on a very fine, I think you could say, minor poet, Louise Bogan, who's a marvelous technician, and there's this touching, careful, and objective tribute to her. Well, his cuttings, I don't think, I can't connect them with anybody's poetry, but after he'd written those poems, he did something very bold. He imitated Yeats, and he was told that was disastrous, and many people had tried to and failed. And in the end, he carried it off. He got this magnificent sort of stanzaic poem that's much simpler mind than Yeats, but more music, more elemental and less profundity and humor. And it's very curious. He made it, it's too simple to say this later style is just from Yeats. It's from a number of other poets who wrote in sonorous poems and stanzas. And suddenly the thing that seemed most old-fashioned to do turned out to be the most modern, that he made these his own. I don't know if you'll even notice any trace of Yeats in this, I Knew a Woman. I knew a woman, lovely in her bones. When small birds sighed, she would sigh back at them. Ah, when she moved more ways than one, the shapes a bright container can contain. Of her choice virtues only gods should speak, or English poets who grew up on Greek. I'd have them sing in chorus, cheek to cheek. How well her wishes went. She stroked my chin, she taught me turn and counter-turn and stand. She taught me touch that undulant white skin. I nibbled meekly from her proffered hand. She was the sickle, I, poor I, the rake, coming behind her for her pretty sake. But what prodigious mowing we did make. That marvelous. You feel marvel and all sorts of wonderful things behind this. Love likes a gander and adores a goose. Her full lips purse, the errant note to seize. Wonderful use of words, that errant note to seize. She played it quick, she played it light and loose. My eyes, they dazzled at her flowing knees. Her several parts could keep a pure repose, or one hip quiver with a mobile nose. She moved in circles, and those circles moved. Let seed be grass, and grass turn into hay. I'm martyr to emotion not my own. What's freedom for? To know eternity? I swear she cast a shadow white as stone. But who would count eternity in days? Those old bones live to learn her wanton ways. I measure time by how a body sways. Wonderful music and magnificence, but it's a real love poem. It's not just eloquence. I seem to have one funny one from each person. This is called the Geranium, and this combined three of his interests in flowers, in himself, and in women. And it's a late poem, the Geranium, and it's about a rather awful geranium that was going to seed in pieces, and he'd put beer tops in it and so forth, and finally the maid threw it out, and he fires the maid. And it's sort of a love poem to this geranium, and I think the geranium is sort of a caricature of himself. It's a witty poem. The Geranium. When I put her out once by the garbage pail, that's not a girl, but the geranium, She looked so limp and bedraggled, so foolish and trusting, like a sick poodle or a wizened aster in late September. I brought her back in again for a new routine. Vitamins, water, and whatever sustenance seemed sensible at the time. She lived so long on gin, bobby pins, half-smoked cigars, dead beer, her shriveled petals falling on the faded carpet, the stale steak grease stuck to her fuzzy leaves. You can see people lived well, though. Dried out, she creaked like a tulip. The things she endured, the dumb dames shrieking half the night, or the two of us alone, both seedy, me breathing booze at her, she leaning out of her pot toward the window. Near the end, she seemed almost to hear me, and that was scary. So when that snuffling cretin of a maid threw her pot and all into the trash can, I said nothing. But I sacked the presumptuous hag the next week. I was that lonely. Now I read this with embarrassment. Your crimes come back to you. That Ted and I were at Yaddo one summer, and he's a very neat man, and he got up late, and he put a sign, "Do not disturb," outside his door, and he'd be there till about noon. And then he got up, and he shared a bathroom with a woman novelist who was very bohemian and, unlike Ted, very dirty. And somehow he'd arrive while she was sort of all over the basin, and then he'd go back to his room in a state of nausea. And at that point, the maid of the place would come to make up his bed, and the "Don't Disturb" sign had been taken down accidentally. And we were talking about troubles we had there, and he said, "You have nothing compared to the snuffling cretin who comes in and routs me out of my room." Well, I thought that was wonderful and immediately used it in a poem. And then, without any acknowledgement, 15 years later, he took it himself. Now, the last poem of his has a relation to the first, that many of his last poems are different from many of his others, and they're poems of, they're religious poems of a sense of despair and joy, of sort of annihilation and light and darkness. Such images are used. And I suppose you'd say they're manic, depressive poems of that kind. And they're written with that same great feel for the resounding line that the first poem I read you, that nobody could knock out an iambic line like Ted. And this is interesting to see how different the mood is from the love poem. This is called The Marrow, and he was obsessed by his body. He was a big man, and all through his book there various animals appear, bears and slugs and sloths and so forth, and you always think of him, and there's a good deal of humor in this. And the marrow is this sheer weight of flesh. This poem would have some connection, I think, with the Schwartz poem I read, The Heavy Bear, but it's in a lyrical vein. The stanzas are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, so you might think of it more as a sequence than as a poem that didn't have numbered stanzas. The Marrow. It's one of his great poems, I think. The wind from off the sea says nothing new. The mist above me sings with its small flies. From a burnt pine, the sharp speech of a crow tells me my drinking breeds a will to die. What's the worst portion in this mortal life? a pensive mistress and a yelping wife. One white face shimmers brighter than the sun when contemplation dazzles all I see. One look too close can take my soul away. Brooding on God, I may become a man. Pain wanders through my bones like a lost fire. What burns me now? Desire, desire, desire. Godhead above my God, are you there still? To sleep is all my life. In sleep's half death, my body alters, altering the soul that once could melt the dark with its small breath. Lord, hear me out, and hear me out this day. From me to thee's a long and terrible way. I was flung back from suffering and love when light divided on a storm-tossed tree. Yea, I have slain my will, and still I live. I would be near, I shut my eyes to see. I bleed my bones, their marrow, to bestow upon that God who knows what I would know. And I bleed my bones, their marrow. It's wonderful. Now I wanted to read a couple of Tate poems, and the first two, they're two sonnets at Christmas, and one of the, perhaps the best thing ever written on Tate was an early essay of Delmore's, and he particularly admired these sonnets, and I think what everyone feels about Tate's poetry, that when it comes off right, there's tremendous wrenching and discipline to get it right, so that great obstacles can overcome, and these are very composed poems, but there's no unpleasant sense of fluency. And they're about one of his main subjects, the introverted man, the man all thought and thought about himself, unlike someone in other societies. It's a sort of Eliot man, that proof rock kind of person. But these are sonnets at Christmas, and the first is that there's nothing to do anymore at Christmas, that you're just a person with a huge head looking at the troubled sky, and these sort of meaningless red and white paper wrapped things appear. And the famous last line, he says, these paper bells ring out the silence he is nourished by. And there's we can easily go too far with double meanings and ambiguities and so forth, but this one's definitely meant, and ring out the silence I'm nourished by. Well, the silence could be some sort of spiritual profundity, or it could be emptiness. Both those meanings dramatically bear here. The his in the poem is Christ. This is 1934. This is the day his hour of life draws near. Let me get ready from head to foot for it, most handily with eyes to pick the year for small feed to reward a feathered wit. Some men would see it an epiphany, at ease, at food and drink, others at chase, yet I, stung lassitude, with ecstasy unspent, argue the season's difficult case. So, man, dull critter of enormous head, what would he look at in the coiling sky? But I must kneel again unto the dead, while Christmas bells of paper white and red, figured with boys and girls spilt from a sled, ring out the silence I am nourished by. And one more is the last poem he's published. It was written about 10 years ago, and perhaps his greatest poem. And it's something to think about. It's called The Swimmers, and it's about some little boys in the South going to the swimming hole, to the spring. And I guess there's some symbolic meaning to the title. They are swimmers, but the water is meant to be refreshment, the waters of life. And on their way, they come on a Negro who's been lynched and hanged, and the sheriff's posse is out, and they've come, of course, too late to save the Negro's life, and the Negro's body is dragged back to town. It's a vision of evil and horror, and it's a little like Faulkner, I think, but it's not like the usual civil rights view, and it certainly isn't Southern conservative, that the Southerners are the evil people, but it's a very different angle. I think of him when I first met him. He tried being an agrarian farmer with tenants for 3 or 4 years, and he turned out not to be a farmer, even a master of tenants, but with his Confederate flag and his .22 rifle above the fireplace and so forth, and marvelous anecdotes and dirty stories that the tenants told, and there's curious gallantry and grandeur about it all. The Swimmers. This is in Dante's Terza Rima, and really rather hard meter in English, and it seems very hard when Tate writes it, and there are definite echoes of Dante. This is some form of hell. Kentucky water, clear springs, a boy fleeing to water under the dry Kentucky sun, his 4 little friends in tandem with him, seeing long shadows of grapevine wriggle and run over the green swirl, mullein under the ear soft as Nausicaa's palm, sullen fun savage as childhood's thin harmonious tear. O fountain, bosom source, undying, dead, replenish me the spring of love and fear, and give me back the eye that looked and fled when a thrush idling in the tulip tree unwound the cold dream of the copperhead. Along the creek, the road was winding. We felt the quicksilver sky. I see again the shrill companions of that odyssey: Bill Eaton, Charlie Watson, Nigger Lane, the doctor's son, Harry Dessler, who played the flute, and Tate with water on the brain. You know, he has a head that comes out like this, and when he was a boy, they kidded him and said he had water on the brain. Dog days. The dusty leaves where rain delayed hung low on poison oak and scuppernong, and we were following the active shade of water that bells and bickers all night long. No more than a mile, Lane said. All 5 stood still. Listening, I heard what seemed at first a song. Peering, I heard the hooves come down the hill. The posse passed, 12 horse. The leader's face was worn as limestone on an ancient sill. Then as sleepwalkers shift from a hard place in bed and rising to keep a formal pledge to send a ladder into empty space, We scuttled down the bank below a ledge and marched stiff-legged in our common fright along a hog track by the riffle's edge. Into a world where sound shaded the sight, dropped the dull hooves again. The horseman came again, all but the leader. It was night, momently, and I feared. 11 same Jesus Christers, unmembered and unmade, whose corpse had died again in dirty shame. The bank then leveling in a speckled glade, we stopped to breathe above the swimming hole. I gazed at its reticulated shade, recoiling in blue fear, and felt it roll over my ears and eyes and lift my hair like seaweed tossing on a sunk atoll. I rose again, borne on the copper air, a distant voice green as a funeral wreath against a grave. That dead nigger there. The melancholy sheriff slouched beneath a giant sycamore. Shaking his head, he plucked a sassafras twig and picked his teeth. We'd come too late. He spoke to the tired dead, whose ragged shirt soaked up the viscous flow of blood in which it lay discomfited. A budding horsefly gave one ear a blow and glanced off as the sheriff kicked the rope loose from the neck and hooked it with his toe away from the blood. I looked back down the slope. The friends were gone that I'd hoped to greet. A single horseman came at a slow lope and pulled up at the hanged man's horny feet. The sheriff noosed the feet, the other end the stranger tied to his pommel in a neat slip knot. I saw the Negro's body bend and straighten as a fish line cast transverse yields to the current that it must subtend. The sheriff's goddamn was a murmured curse, not for the dead, but for the blinding dust that boxed the cortege in a cloudy hearse and dragged it toward our town. I knew I must not stay till twilight in that silent road. Sliding my bare feet into the warm crust, I hopped the stone crop like a panting toad, mouth open, following the heaving cloud that floated to the courthouse square, its load of limber corpse that took the sun for shroud. There were 3 figures in the dying sun whose light was company where 3 was crowd. My breath crackled the dead air like a shotgun as sheriff and the stranger disappearing, the faceless head lay still. I could not run or walk, but stood. Alone in the public clearing, this private thing was owned by all the town, though never claimed by us within my hearing. Now I want to end by reading 3 poems of my own. Long ago, 20 years ago, 1946, Delmore was teaching English composition here at Harvard, Briggs Copeland Fellowship professor. I guess he wasn't a professor, but he thought it'd be a marvelous thing that if I could be gotten a job here, and he impressed me it'd be a very difficult thing to achieve. And I visited him, and he felt this all should be planned very carefully, and we should meet a lot of people, and but one by one and in right order. And he was absolutely fascinating on the people teaching here. I've never heard such sketches of the person you're about to meet. And, well, someone who was absolutely decisive in this was T.S. Eliot's brother, Henry Ware Eliot, who really wasn't very connected with the college, but did something at the Widener Library. And it was felt that if we could win him, that this would be in the bag somehow. Well, the day when Mr. Eliot and his wife were to come, the furnace went off, and we had a little quarrel about who was most inefficient, and somehow it didn't get on again. And then other things. The refrigerator began to let out lethal gas, and so the windows had to be opened, and then it began to rain and sleet. And at that point, Mr. L had arrived with his wife, rather frail and deaf and shivering, and asked for tea, which we just weren't prepared for at all, and we gave him some awful liquid, and he shivered and left, and we realized this wasn't a triumph, and we had some gin. And, you know, this was written at a time when I learned to do without symbols, and there's a duck in the poem, and it's a duck, not the... not the Holy Spirit. To Delmore Schwartz. This was read at his funeral, and it's sort of something elegy about it, I think. We couldn't even keep the furnace lit, even when we had disconnected it. The antiquated refrigerator gurgled mustard gas through your mustard yellow house and spoiled our long maneuvered visit from T.S. Eliot's brother, Henry Ware. Your stuffed duck craned toward Harvard from my trunk. Its bill was a black whistle, and its brow was high and thinner than a baby's thumb. Its webs were tough as toenails on its bow. It was your first kill. You had rushed it home pickled in a tin wastebasket of rum. It looked through us as if it had died dead drunk. You must have propped its eyelids with a nail, and yet it lived with us and met our stare, Rabelaisian, lubricious, drugged. And there, perched on my trunk and typing table, it cooled our universal angst a moment, Delmore. We drank and eyed the chicken-hearted shallows of the world. Underseas fellows, nobly mad, we talked away our friends. Let Joyce and Freud, the masters of joy, be our guests here, you said. The room was filled with cigarette smoke circling the paranoid, inert gaze of Coleridge back from Malta, his eyes lost in flesh, lips baked and black. Your tiger kitten, it's just an alley cat, not a creature from Bengal. Your tiger kitten, Oranges, that's what he called her, cartwheeled for joy in a ball of snarls. You said, we poets in our youth begin in sadness. There from the end come despondency and madness. Stalin has had 2 cerebral hemorrhages. The Charles River was turning silver. In the ebb light of morning, we stuck the duck's webbed foot like a candle in a quart of gin we'd killed. And this is a little poem on Theodore Roethke that is an elegy, and doesn't get as close to him as the other does, but these things come as they will. The scenes in Maine where I was spending the summer when I heard of his death. He dove into a swimming pool and had a heart attack. He drowned in the water, and they don't quite know whether his heart stopped or he drowned. All night, you wallowed through my sleep. Then in the morning you were lost in the main sky, close, cold, and gray, smoke and smoke-colored cloud. Sheep-like, unsociable, reptilian, 2 hell divers splattered squawking on the water, loons devolving to a monochrome. You honored nature, helpless, elemental creature. The black stump of your hand just touched the waters under the earth and left them quickened with your name. Now you honor the mother. Omnipresent, she made you non-existent. The ocean's anchor, our high tide. And one last poem that this has nothing to do with anyone except the world. Central Park, it's called Central Park in New York. I hope I haven't been flip about any of these people. Well, this is, it's Central Park in the summer. It's hot and people are out and you have a feeling of heat and sex and overpopulation and poverty and violence. Park becomes sort of opposite of, say, Marvel's Garden. It's a paradise gone wrong. It's a terrifying park, and it was written last summer. It seems even truer this summer, but it's not literally true. You can go through Central Park without being knifed. This is a deep poetic truth. Scaling small rocks, exhaling smog, gasping at game scents like a dog, now light as pollen, now as white and winded as a grounded kite. I watched the lovers occupy every inch of earth and sky, one figure of geometry, multiplied to infinity, straps down and sunning openly. Each precious, public, pubic tangle and equilateral triangle lost in the park, half covered by the shade of some low stone or tree. The stain of fear and poverty spread through each trapped anatomy and darkened every mote of dust. All wished to leave this drying crust, borne on the delicate wings of lust like bees, and cast their fertile drop into the overwhelming cup. Drugged and humbled by the smell of zoo straw mixed with animal, the lion prowled his slummy cell, serving his life term in jail, glaring, grinding on his heel with tingling step and testicle. Behind a dripping rock, I found a one-day kitten on the ground, deprived, weak, ignorant, and blind, squeaking, tubular, left behind, dying with its deserters' rich welfare lying out of reach, milk cartons, kidney heaped to spoil, 2 plates sheathed with silver foil. Shadows had stained the afternoon. High in an elm, a snagged balloon wooed the attraction of the moon. Scurrying from the mouth of night, a single fluttery paper kite, gray as Cleopatra's needle, and sailed where the light of the sun had failed. Then night, the jungle hour, the rich in his slit-windowed tower, old pharaohs starving in your foxholes, with painted banquets on the walls,
fists knotted in your captive's hair, tyrants with little food to spare. All your embalming left you mortal, glazed, black and hideously eternal. All your plunder and gold leaf only served to draw the thief. We beg delinquents for our life, behind each bush perhaps a knife, each landscaped crag, each flowering shrub hides a policeman with a club. Thank you.
You've gone long enough. Do you want to bother with questions? Or
I'll answer questions, yeah.
Would you like some water?
Yeah. Is that all right?
That's great. You know, if that air conditioning starts to blow directly on you, it gets you on the just give them a minute to get out.
I'm supposed to say I'll respond to questions. I don't know if I can answer them.
Mr. Lowell will answer a few questions.
Yeah. Should I be more candid? No, I think she saw the Ed Millay of this sort of period. I mean, it's a confessional poetry of the mode of the time, and she has a genius for it. And it's also very easy poetry in the sense that it immediately hits you, and it has a kind of glamour to it. And she's not as good a poet as Sylvia Plath, but she's not really that kind of poet. It's another thing that it's amazing how much she gets out into these poems, and often with great simplicity and often with great boldness. And, she's a fine poet. That are alive now? Well, I think the best are Neruda and Montale and Pasternak, of course, who's dead, but Montale, the Italian, and those are the best I've read. A little further back, the great poets of the century, I think, would be those I've named, but Rilke and Mandelstam from Russia, and Yeats, of course, and Hardy. Lorca, I think more in his plays, probably. That I don't know he's as great a poet as Neruda. He's a fine poet, though, in his ballads. They're very hard to judge. A lot of them are in this ballad form that's impossible to translate into English. He's a great playwright. And Machado is a wonderful poet. Perhaps the finest of the Spanish. Vallejo is a lot of Spanish poets. And two best Germans, I think, are Brecht and Rilke. Best poet in England now is Graves. Yeah.
T.S. Eliot didn't seem to like Ezra Pound's early work, or rather didn't like his work when he first read it, but later in his life, he said he felt that Pound's cantos were quite good. Do you think that Pound really lived up to, I don't know, his early promise, and also do you think that perhaps his leaving his country and moving into an environment outside of his native natural environment had an adverse effect upon his poetry?
Oh, yes and no. I mean, I think his great poem is the Pisan Cantos, written when he was in prison, and it's certainly imperfect and too long and marvelous, I think, and great stretches that are good. And it's a queer poem of sort of reverie and memory and personal experience, and he didn't have books then, and he was facing perhaps being executed, and everything he remembered and read seemed to come back. It's mostly about France and England more than America or Italy, and I think that's his top. And other things, I like a lot of the early cantos very much, and the Cathay translations are wonderful, I think, and the Propertius poem, which isn't exactly a translation, and the Moberly. So there's a lot of wonderful Pound, I think, and the cantos are the nearest we've got to a successful, really long poem. I mean, I wouldn't call The Wasteland a long poem, it's another kind, but this is something as long as a long novel, and which has turned out to be almost an impossibility in our age, so that a funny thing, I mean, I know Pound quite well, and saw him last spring in Italy, and he's like some sort of Oedipus who's gone through a terrifying experience, and though he isn't writing anymore, he's reached a kind of Marrow nobility, rather awesome kind that he never had before, and it's kind of truth about himself he sees that you wouldn't wish anyone to see about himself. And it's not, he's never a bad man. He was just terribly in error. He was an unusually kind man and unusually brave and talented, but obviously made a just frightful error. I mean, not just misjudgment, something that made his whole life seem to have slid off the rocks into the abyss. And he has the dignity of someone who did that, and this is answering your question, that he's perhaps the only poet who took enough risk to have that kind of remorse. Yeah.
It was said earlier, perhaps not with your blessing, with all due deference, that as a poet you didn't grow but were cast. I'd like to ask you a question about development.
That isn't it.
Well, would you say what you said so that
Yes.
So you can garble it.
The point is that, Cal, do you mind if we talk about you?
Yeah, I'll go out trailing this tail, yeah.
Well, let's drop it and let me
Yeah.
say that the poets that you read tonight and the poem you chose to read seem to tend toward a darkening vision in poetry. You read some of their last poems and later poems.
Yeah.
Then you read this last group of poems of your own, the last poem particularly, which seemed a very dark poem indeed. Is this a development in your poetry, a poetic vision?
Advancing toward darkness. I don't know, it's a dark moment. These are terrible times, I think. But I don't try to be any darker than I can help. And I suppose thinking of three dead people is somber, too. They're quite aside from the times that their lives were tragic in different ways, all three of them, I think, and quite all different entirely.
Roethke's perhaps the least so. And the most heartbreaking death was Jarrell's, that you feel it was needless. And he could have lived many more years of successful achievement. And Delmore's whole life would, I mean, that all ought to be written up. It's as important as his poetry and somebody who knows it all. And it's some story of the times. So there's that kind of darkness, and then it's a dark moment, I think, of history. But I don't believe in advancing toward darkness. Yeah.
Do you foresee publishing any more prose and historical dating life studies, perhaps organic nature, you were just saying?
Oh yeah, I want to write sort of more memoirs, and it's very hard to write about people who are alive, actually. That not that you'd say anything slanderous, but you can't. It intrudes on them to try to tell the truth, symbolic truth. That I think so. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
What younger poets, Sam,
You've got Sylvia Plath, who's dead. Ted Hughes, her husband, they're not under 35, the ones I like. They're under 49, what I am. My favorite poets are Philip Larkin in England. I think he and Graves are the best British poets, and he's the best English poet since Thomas, and almost as good as Thomas. In this country, Alan Dugan and Snodgrass I like very much. And there are an awful lot of quite good people that I don't sort of want to water my list by adding more, but there are a lot you really don't keep up as much. You have to be the same age as these people to you read the ones that somebody likes a lot and make your own judgment, but you don't read all the ones that someone else reads that age to get the setting. That someone else I think is awfully good. Wife of a friend, a poet who right around here I think is one of the best, Adrian Rich. Wonderful poet. I like Ginsberg. I don't think he's a great poet, but he's a good idea. Some of his poetry is good. Yeah.
Landscape for new thematic concerns as opposed to Boston, for example?
Well, I think New York's different. I mean, it is different. I don't know. These poems they're metrical and they're sort of return to early style of mine, and yet they're different. I think they're more open and they're different subjects. And I think New York's entirely different from Boston. It's sort of the modern city, and it's a sort of symbol of culture and industry and so forth, in the way Boston isn't at all. And you find that it does that to everybody. I mean, that you couldn't have the great New York poem is Hart Crane's Bridge. It couldn't be written about Boston. And New York's almost without history. It's obliterated it. It's a present reality, and it's a much stronger one than any. You can't make this sort of statement, but I mean, everything's what you find in it. And it seemed at one time that, I'm digressing, that Faulkner, compared to someone like Thomas Mann or Pasternak, took a very provincial subject, Mississippi. Then that turns out to be almost the center of the world, the race problem. I could go on all night about Boston, New York. Yeah.
I can't quite hear you. Stunned by my own voice. Sorry.
There's a group of poets who consider themselves as not following out of the direct tradition of American English poetry, but reach more to, say, prose tradition.
You mean Dylan?
Yes, exactly. Well, and this particular group, what's your opinion of these poets?
I'm afraid I'd be asked that. And well, I think Dylan's a rather good poet. I haven't read enough of it, and you can't hear it when it's blared out at you. I mean, ballads are marvelous poems, and he has something of that quality. I just don't know them well enough, whether they're bad ballads or good ballads, and I think both. A lot of it's quite bad that he writes, and a lot of it's quite brilliant. And I don't see it as a count. There's room for everything. I mean, there's room for Mallarmé and for Barbara Allen. Susan Sontag. Any more? Yeah.
I believe you were quoted as saying that attempting to be topical about current issues is not reduces the effectiveness of the poet.
I don't think that. No, I mean, I think Pound and Auden gained by being topical, and Auden's the poet who did that.
You commented on a reading at a meeting of protest about military situation.
I don't think I did. I mean, I certainly believe, you know, you get anti-Vietnam anthologies, and Death of President Kennedy anthologies. They're not likely to have much good poetry. I mean, the big theme doesn't. But it's utterly ridiculous to say these important subjects aren't poetic subjects. I mean, if you have the talent to go to town on them, and yeah.
What have you been doing formally since the things you published in the New York Review? Are you still working in tightly rhymed forms?
I'm translating Prometheus Bound into prose. Diffusing it into prose, making it longer. I'm doing an acting version of the Prometheus. No, I have some other translations. That's the end of. They're meant to hang together, those poems, and be a sequence. I didn't do any of the. No. I wrote a little prose paragraph on him.
Thank you.